Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? If you've been watching my channel lately, last like year and a half, you'll notice that I've kind of gone through several paradigm shifts. Not major paradigm shifts, but just, you know, different, gone through some different ideas in terms of what do I want to do with gaming as I branch out. I certainly I'm going to continue to play the games that I love and I grew up with, or at least, retro clone variants thereof. But I've also become interested in a lot more ways to game, different types of games, different ways to approach role-playing games. And so this is going to be one of those topics that I've become more interested in lately. And if you watch the Hangout chat I had with Anthony, we did this Ubiquity chat. Um, Runeslinger and I talked a little bit about a whole bunch of stuff. Actually, we talked a lot. But one of the things we talked about was a different way to improve your character over time. Now, normally in the games that I grew up with, and I dare say most role-playing games, what happens is you gain experience, however that happens in that game. Then you expend those experience points on improving the character themselves. In other words, they become smarter, they become stronger, they become faster, they become more skilled, they become better at magic, they become better at combat, they become better at social manipulation, whatever it is. In other words, if you took all their stuff away, if they suddenly became homeless, friendless, moneyless, they still would be able to do all this stuff. So you've improved the character. You're kind of turning them into, like, I'm going to use the analogy of maybe like the Olympic athlete or the scholar. They're going to school, they're drilling, they're practicing, they're taking tests, they're becoming more skilled. There's a different way to improve characters in some games, mechanically. And I'm going to talk about Ubiquity because that's the game that I've been playing a lot and that I can speak to the best. But I know to some of you I'm late to the party because there's many games that offer this as part of their experience track, even some really old games. But that's more like where you improve things that are external to the character that they're still defined by. That would be like things like their wealth, what Ubiquity calls a refuge. Where you live, your lair, for lack of a better word. It's a place you can go retreat to. Your social standing, your standing or rank in various clubs or organizations, your fame. Things like any social contacts you have in terms of just contacts in general, the social contact network, your followers, people that are loyal and devoted to you, henchmen, hirelings, retainers. Your allies, people that are trusted friends, people that are patrons that you can look to get money or stuff or help. Even things like artifacts, like inventions, like in this game, Leagues of Adventure, you can make stuff. You can make weird science devices. You can invent things. I also believe in like Hollow Earth Expeditioners, some stuff like that. That can also be things that define your character. But these are things that you can lose. Resources can be lost. But they can often define your character in a really powerful and meaningful way. And so this is kind of like more becoming a mover and shaker. And if you think about the real world, who are the real influential people? Yeah, sure, there's going to be some Olympic athletes and scholars and, what have you. But it's the people that have all these connections, all these resources. They're the real movers and shakers. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with improving your character, but there's another way to skin the cat. There's another way to spend experience. And this is something that, this is what we did kind of organically for a long time. If we played in long campaigns, we'd gain social contacts, but it was all role play. Maybe we gain something like a refuge or a lair. Like Lamentations of the Flame Princess literally has costs for, like, if you want to buy real estate or if you want to rent someplace. And that's what we did. We rented because it was a lot cheaper. But if you're a wizard, you need a library and a laboratory if you're going to do any kind of research. I wanted to do research, so this cost money. So it was role played. There was some experience in terms of, like, I killed people and stole their stuff, and there I got the money. Okay, we were playing a D&D variant, but it was mostly role played, and this, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's cool. That's what we did for a long, long time. This kind of codifies it. And in talking to Anthony, because I did have some misgivings about this. Like I said, I wasn't really sure what I thought about it. It was neat, but I wasn't sure what I thought. And one of the things he said was that it stabilizes collaboration. Made a lot of sense. In other words, the use of earn and award experience points and role-playing showed clearly what story elements capture the player's imagination. It was fair. It's like, it's one thing to, like, go and explore in South America and to chat up the dignitaries and what have you. It's another thing to say, hey, that shows interest. But there's another thing to say, hey, I want to spend my experience points to solidify those relationships so they can call upon these people. Because part of the idea of spending experience points on a resource in Ubiquity is this resource, whether it's wealth, whether it's your status, whether it's your fame, whether it's a patron, whether it's an ally, follower, this now represents something that you can solve your problems with, as opposed to just people you kind of know, or wealth you kind of have, but you really need to spend it on something else. You have operating expenses. This becomes now stuff that's usable for you to solve your problems and to play the game. Now, you play a game like, let's see, Desolation, no resources. Don't need to worry about this. It's post-apocalyptic. There's nothing left. But if you're playing something like Leagues of Adventure, Hollow Earth Expedition, All for One, resources come into play. Now, part of the whole mindset that I had to get into with this is, I talked about in the video with Anthony where we were talking about Ubiquity, that rather long chat we had, and the video right before that, the idea of like different tiers or power levels. And I was first talking about something like old school D&D because, what they did in the original game was they talked about 3 tiers. I don't think they called them tiers, but I'm calling them tiers, so go with this. Where you can be normal, you can be heroic, or super heroic. And the idea, it's a 0 to hero character progression in that game, and in a lot of games. So at some point you progress from being normal to kind of being heroic, which is kind of like, I always call it like the Die Hard thing. You're a cut above average. And then super heroic, where it gets to be kind of ridiculous. And that can be a lot of fun, but it can be a little ridiculous. And the sweet spot for a lot of people tends to be in that heroic tier, where you've survived long enough that you're not squishy, but you're not like a complete, you can't just bull rush your way through life. You still have to be careful. And, a lot of the non-class level based games, in my experience, and just things I've looked at, they tend to kind of compress that. And you kind of like live in one of these tiers. And a lot of them tend to be this heroic sort of tier, which a lot of people like that. And I think Ubiquity, if you really look at the characters, at least comparing them to like the OSR, Retroclone, what have you, D&D characters, they're kind of like the lower end of heroic when they first start out, for lack of a better term. Depends if you put all your eggs in one basket. Certainly Philippe, my musketeer, is really on the upper end of heroic in terms of his offensive combat ability. He's pretty darn good. He's not really good at a lot else. Well, he can jump around. He's athletic and acrobatic. But that's where I put my experience. Because one of the things you do with the Ubiquity character is, that you've got 15 points to spread around in your 6 primary attributes. 2 is nominally normal. So if you have attributes that are 3, you say you just spend, 1 on each, you have 3 attributes that are 3. Okay, well, you're a little bit better. That's what I did with Philippe. You have 15 experience points to spread around. So you can pile them all up in a few abilities, which I did once again with Philippe. He's really good at fencing, or you can spread them around and be a lot more egalitarian and be a little more of a jack of all trades. And then you have 1 free talent, because the talents really define your character. And this is more about like who your character is, what they can do. It's a little bit more body stuff usually, although you can have things like the well-connected talent. Then you get this last 15 points that you have to spend either on another talent, which once again I did with Philippe and made him really quite good at fencing, or you can spend this on a resource. You can even split it up into 2 level 0 resources, because they have this level system of how powerful your resource becomes. Anyhow, so your characters are kind of like, they're already relatively competent when it comes right down to it. Now, you can choose to improve your character through continuing to spend your earned experience points to make your character better. And, it takes a while, I've noticed, to really become better, because you're kind of scrunched down in this tier, which is not a bad thing. You can become relatively powerful over time. However, one of the other things you can do is you can choose to spend your experience points on resources and become better connected. You have more fame, be able to solve your problems with things outside yourself, have many more allies, many more contacts, and that can become very interesting. Things that we did organically, but now we're choosing to focus our experience and our role-playing in that direction, and really valuing those things enough that we're actually going to put our experience into that. That's kind of an interesting paradigm shift to me. That's even to the point where you're kind of affecting game world reality just a little bit. It's not cheating. It's not, it's not overly it's way over into the narrativist camp, which is not cheating. That's the wrong word, but the idea, it still makes sense to me. But it's a different way to approach, like, who's my character? What's really going to define them? Is it just going to be their physical attributes, or how good they are, how smart they are, or is it going to be like what they've built up on the outside? Even if it's things like artifacts, items that they've created or found or made via magic, what have you. So I just did this real brief mathematical exercise. I'm not going to bore you to tears with math, I promise. But starting Ubiquity characters, depending if you were had to actually buy all these things with experience points, the cheapest way you could do it would be 105 experience points. The most expensive would be 180. That's neither here nor there, but I want to start out with a baseline. Characters do not improve in these little levels the way non-player characters do. When you're looking at like non-player characters or monsters, characters start out what would be called a level 2 or talented. To go from 2 to 3, which is influential, a non-player character now has, they get 3 more ability score points, so they have 18 spread around. They have 5 more skill points, so now they have 20 instead of 15, and they have 3 talents or resources instead of 2. So the cheapest way to get that would be to spend 70 experience points if you were a character, a player character. The most expensive way would be to spend, I believe it's 117. And I'm not going to go into all the math how you do that, but pretty much it's like you become very specialized in a one-trick pony. It's going to cost you more because you can only increase like 1 point at a time in a skill or an attribute, so you have to spend a multiple of that in experience points. So at that point, you become, once again, your character. You become more of an Olympic athlete, more of a scholar, more of a specialist. Take away everything else from you. You're better that way, which is very classic, very standard. Or say I said the average of that maybe would be like experience point wise would be around like 100, and at that point you could take those 75 points on average. This is government work, not real average, but close. And instead of buying things like ability increases your ability scores and or increases in your skills, you could spend all those on talents. At 15 XP apiece, well, that's 5 or not talents. You could spend on talents, I suppose. You could spend them on resources. So that's 5 more resources, plus another 15 experience points on that other resource or talent. They're talking about 6 more resources. That's a lot of contacts. That's a lot of improvement in your social status. That's a lot of improvement in things like your patron, better artifacts, however you want to define your character on the outside. At that point, with those 2 characters, and this is not about them being adversarial, but just for sake of example, you get the 2 guys. Well, now the person has spent all their experience points on making themselves more powerful within their own person. Well, if these 2 got into a fight or an argument or whatever, their magical duel or whatever, to say they're equal, they've decided to expend their initial character concept on the same things. Okay, well maybe the guy that spent all of his experience points and make himself his character better could probably overcome the one that spent all of their experience points on resources. However, good chance that the person that spent all their experience on resources would never have to deal with that first character because their resources would have taken care of them before they ever got to them. Interesting. Just kind of a novel way to redefine, how do I want to improve my character over time? It's something I haven't done yet. It's something that it'd be kind of neat to experiment with. I can tell you that's not going to happen with Philippe. He might get a few more contacts, but he's kind of a one-trick pony. His one trick is being physically very good at stuff and being a musketeer. But that's the vibe of that game. The vibe of that game can also be social contacts too, but that's really not the direction that character seems to be going. Other characters seem to be going that way because they're more interested in that. I think he wants to improve his fame and his rank in the Musketeers, but not in a lot of other things. But I could see playing it in other games like Hollow Earth or Leagues of Adventure or what have you, or a different character in All for One, where I might want to improve my resources and define my character that way. So what kind of experience have you had with that in Ubiquity or other games? I'd like to hear that. So, happy gaming.